Thanks to all of you for inviting me here. It's a real honor to be in Toronto, where I've seen the animal rights movement grow and explode over the past couple of years. And honestly, we in the United States and Barrie have a lot to learn from all of you after that march on Saturday. So keep up the great work. But I'm going to share a couple stories, and the first story I want to share, and it's actually perfect timing, is my first experience visiting a slaughterhouse and actually trying to get inside. So 10 years ago, I was a law professor, as Tom noted. What Tom did not note is that I was a complete failure as a law professor. I was a terrible teacher. The students didn't like me. I was an even worse researcher. I couldn't get anything published. And after 20-some years of my life expecting to be an academic and a professor, it was a complete disaster for me emotionally to not be able to fulfill the expectations of my family, my friends, and even myself. And frankly, I was suicidal. Like every day I'd go into the law school, I'd park my car, and frankly, for the first hour, I'd go to the top floor of the parking lot and think about throwing myself off. This is how bad it was getting. I was seriously depressed. And this is kind of the first lesson I hope everyone takes home from my brief comments, and that is, every time you have an obstacle or some failure in life, it's also an opportunity. And for me, the fact that I realized that being a professor was not my calling gave me a chance to see what was my calling. And what I decided was my calling was fighting for animals. I'd already been a vegan by that point for I think 7 years. I'd been a vegan advocate that entire time. I'd tabled, I'd leafleted, or I'd organized demonstrations. I'd told people all across the country about these horrible things that were happening in factory farms, but I had never been inside any of them. Not a single time. And so what I decided to do, since my life was a complete disaster anyways, was to try and infiltrate the last remaining slaughterhouse in the city of Chicago. And Chicago used to be the largest slaughterhouse city in the entire United States, but there's only one slaughterhouse left. It's called Chipetti Veal and Lamb Slaughterhouse. And I thought to myself, if my life is going to be thrown away, I might as well go down trying to save as many of these animals as I possibly can. And I had heard about open rescue, I'd heard about the ALF, I thought I was going to be like a militant tough guy and run in there and save a bunch of baby cows. And the first thing I realized when I ran in there was, turns out veal calves are not so little. So who knows how big a veal calf is, usually, at slaughter? Any guesses? So there's different types, but a typical veal calf. So usually like 500 to 600 pounds, right? And so I'd seen all these images on not Facebook at the time, but on websites about little baby calves that people are carrying around, maybe 40, 50 pounds. And the slaughterhouse are not larger than that, right? And the lambs were smaller, but still very large, 150 pounds. So I got in there, and the first thing I realized is there's no way in hell I'm going to get any of these animals out. And the second mistake I made was I realized, what's the point of doing this if I'm not documenting what I'm doing? Because the moment you walk into a slaughterhouse, and many of you have now experienced this as part of these vigils, you get a sense of the urgency of this cause, the terror that's in the animals' eyes, the fear that you can feel in the air, the blood that you can smell, the screams that you hear from the slaughterhouse trucks. All these experiences are encapsulated when you visit the sites of these slaughterhouses. And to the extent that we can share these experiences with the world, we need to. And the best way to do that is, of course, to bear witness ourselves, to tell people, I have actually been there. I have seen what's happening behind these closed doors. But if you can't do that, you need to have a camera. And with cameras today, everybody has a smartphone. Everybody has an iPhone. Everybody has some other miniature phone that they can use. With cameras today, so cheap and so small, whenever we see some animal being abused, we have the opportunity to share that story with the world and not just influence the people we directly talk to, but influence millions of people across the world. So the thing that's in your hand, that all of us have in our own hands, this is the most powerful whistleblowing device in the history of human civilization. This gives us an opportunity to share the stories of every single animal who walks through those slaughterhouse doors and doesn't come out alive. And I encourage you to not make the mistake I make. Every time you're here at this facility, every time you're involved in any investigatory work, frankly, even if you're on vacation and you might be driving through an area that has farms, have that camera with you, have it ready, and get ready to share it with the press if you capture something important. Okay, I'm going to fast forward about 3 years to the first successful rescue I was involved in. And this is a rescue, I don't even know if I've shared this story with Elmira, who I've been working with for the past 2 years. I'm sure I haven't shared it with Tom yet. But after my initial kind of barging into a slaughterhouse, frankly being pretty lucky that I didn't get caught. And in one case, there actually was someone who saw me coming out. But one of the astonishing things about slaughterhouses and farms, especially the large ones, is there's so many people going in and out that if you just look like you know what you're doing, you can often get away with a massive amount. And this is something I learned in 10 years of open rescue, that it's not nearly as hard as you might think. And there has yet to be a single farm that after, frankly, a few hours of scouting, I didn't find a plausible path to infiltrate the farm. But it did take me a couple of years before I actually successfully rescued any animals from a situation of abuse. And it was about 2 years later, I think this is 2008. And so who's in the punk community? Any hands? No punks here? Used to be, okay. So, you know, if you've been in the punk community, you probably know that straight edge vegan is like a big thing. And the punk community was very important to the Chicago animal rights movement in 2008. And so I was used to punks being very supportive. But there was one event where they were not very supportive. And this is an event in 2008 where they were trying to do what was called Recreate 1968. In the United States, there was a massive riot and protest at the Democratic conventions in Chicago in 1968. It's a very famous moment in the history of social justice in the United States. And these punks in Chicago, most of them were vegan, many of them were vegan, and many of them had been coming to our protests, decided the way they were going to recreate 1968 was to have someone substitute for the cowardly politicians at a huge show with thousands of screaming punks. So guess who they used to substitute for the politicians?
A pig. A pig.
Pigs. Good guess. Animals. So they took chickens from a live chicken slaughterhouse in a Ukrainian village in Chicago. And these chickens, broiler chickens, for their entire lives, face nothing but abuse. They're confined in very small spaces, and the only interaction they ever have with human beings is when a human comes walking through the shed and beats to death all the runts, all the sick birds, all the small birds. And so they're terrified of human beings. They've also probably never been in open space. So they take these broiler chickens, who their entire lives have been living in sheer terror, who have known nothing but abuse at human hands, and they put them in front of a crowd of a few thousand screaming punk kids with PAs that are blaring in the background. And you can imagine these chickens are absolutely terrified. So I get a call from a couple friends who are punks. There are a lot of really great punks and a lot of really great animal rights activists within the punk community saying, we've got to do something about this. And we did. We just barged to the front of the show. We grabbed the crates where the chickens were being held, and we walked out. And one really great thing about punk kids is they never called the cops. So we were very lucky because it's part of punk culture that we don't, we stick it to the man. We don't call the man. So we got into a big argument. There was some shoving and pushing, but we managed to get the chickens out, and that was my first successful rescue. And the thing I hope all of you take home from this is failure is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that you can only use as an opportunity if you take the initiative, if you're willing to challenge your own boundaries and go to the places where animals are being tortured and do what you can to help them. That might be standing outside doing a vigil, giving some water to a pig, giving them some solace before they die. It could be barging into a punk show and just stealing a bunch of chickens from the punks who are torturing them. Or it could be doing a full-blown investigation, as we've done of DxE, that might take 6 months and 9 months, documenting the cruel conditions and rescuing as many of the animals as you can. But the important thing is you have to take the initiative. You have to realize that animal liberation is a possibility, and it's going to happen, frankly, faster than anyone thinks. But it is only a possibility if you take it into your own hands. If you embody animal liberation with every word, every deed, every action in your life. And the way to do that is to take animal liberation seriously by going to the places where animals are being tortured and taking them out. So I learned a lot about animals and animal liberation from those two birds. And those two chickens lived with me for about, I think, 3 to 4 months before we found a sanctuary. And the last thing I want to share with everybody from Open Rescue and the work I've been doing and from going to places where animals are being tortured is every animal is so special and unique. And many of you have probably had the opportunity doing these vigils of connecting even for a moment with some individual animal, looking into the individual animal's eyes. And those are the transformative moments when you're not only there to witness the suffering of the animal, but you feel a connection with that individual. And when I connected with Marta and Philip, it transformed my life because even after, I think in 2008, I had been a vegan for 9 years, I'd been an animal rights activist for most of that time, and I talked about how important chickens were, how it's wrong for us to abuse them. And I didn't realize how deep speciesism lied, even in my own mind, because in advocating for chickens for 9 years, I never knew anything about any individual chicken. And as a result, I had all these prejudices about chickens, that chickens are stupid, that they're all the same, that roosters are really mean and hens are really nice, that I thought were true across all chickens. But it turns out Marta and Philip, those two chickens that I rescued from a punk show, defied every single one of those stereotypes. So who knows the reputation that roosters have? You know, what's the reputation that roosters have in sanctuaries? Does anyone know?
Rah-rah. Rah-rah.
What's the reputation?
They're
They're aggressive, they're mean, they assault the hens, right? But you've probably met some roosters who are nothing like that at all, right? And Philip was twice as big as Marta, but he was the most gentle, innocent, beautiful, compassionate animal I've ever met in my life. He was gentle with my dogs, my cats, he was gentle with Marta. And one of the things roosters always do is they barge in and they take territory, they take all the food away, and they fight for everything. They always move first. They're kind of like men in human society, right? Really annoying. They always have to, and frankly, maybe I'm an example of that, so you should kick me off the stage. But Philip was the exact opposite of that. Like everything he did very gently, and he'd like look around before he pecked at a berry, even though berries were his favorite food in the world. When he looked at the berry, he'd look around and see, does Marta want some? Does Wayne want some? Does Wayne's dog want some? Before digging in himself, right? And Marta, hens have a reputation for being, and they're, leghorns especially, actually these weren't leghorns, these are broiler chickens. But female hens have a reputation for being very timid and gentle and, non-confrontational. And Marta was a fucking badass. Like, every time you brought food in, she'd crawl up your shirt, peck you to death for that berry. If Philip tried to get food before she did, she'd peck him half to death, to the point that Philip would cower in the corner of the bathroom. And I have to apologize to these chickens because I was raising them in a Chicago bathroom, but I didn't have anyone else to raise them. Every time I brought berries in or any nice treat, Marta would be chasing Philip to the end of the bathroom, to the point that Philip started to learn, okay, when they're nice treats, I just have to walk to the back and wait for Marta to eat first. So these are funny stories, but they're stories that have a point. And the point is every individual life is different. And because every individual life is unique, every individual life is invaluable. And this is what you can get when you actually interact with these animals face to face, and what I hope you all get and try to get when you're doing these vigils. Don't just see these animals as a cluster of beings who are being violated. See them as individuals who, if we work as hard as we can, if we fight with every breath of our lives, if we fight for the rest of our lives, and animal rights is a lifetime commitment, I'll tell you that. If we're going to succeed, we need more activists taking this seriously enough that they say, this is a priority for my life. And frankly, what could be better to do with your life than work for a movement for the liberation of all sentient beings? What could be better than that? But if you make that sort of lifetime commitment, if you tell the stories of the animals, and if you get out into the field and meet these animals face to face, and learn who they are as individuals, and share those individual stories and experiences with your friends, with your family members, and frankly with the media too, we can and we will transform the world. Thank you very much, and I'm excited to be here.